good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this IrishRSA and ICoRSA sponsored workshop. So the objectives of today's workshop are to create awareness of Action 4 of the European Research Area Policy Agenda and to support measures that are part of the European Framework for Research Careers, and also to create awareness of how researchers can engage locally and nationally to address the challenges related to the research careers. So just to introduce myself and my co-host, so my name is Mikey Crean, and I'm a research fellow in the Regenerative Medicine Institute in University of Galway. I'm also the chair of the Research Staff Network in University of Galway, and I'm also the international officer at the Irish Research Staff Association. So next, I would like to introduce my other co-host, which is Dr. Bruno Pereira. So Bruno is a researcher of biomedicine in the Research Institute of Innovation and Health in University of Porto, and he's also the president of ANICIT, which is the Portuguese Research Staff Association. Also, I'd like to introduce Carolina Varela, who is an administrative officer within ICoRSA. And it was really Carolina's idea about this workshop, and we really thank her for all the work that she's been doing in the background. Very much appreciate it. And so finally, I'd like to introduce the main star of the show, which is Dr. Louise Henrich. So Louisa is the Senior Policy Analyst and Advisor to the Board of Directors in FCT, which is the funding agency in Portugal. But most importantly, Louisa is the co-sponsor of Action 4 of the European Research Area Policy Agenda, and we're absolutely delighted to have her with us today. So just to give you an overview of the format, Louisa will start with a presentation, and then this will be followed by a guided discussion. So as this is a workshop, we would really appreciate your input, and we would like to keep this informal, particularly at the questions at the end. So please feel free to get involved. So with that, I will hand you off to Louisa, and Caroline will share the presentation.
Yeah. Good afternoon to everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you today, talking about a subject that I've been focusing kind of 60% of my time during the last years. And so I tried to do a presentation that will give you an overview about what is the European Research Area and how it has evolved, and about then a kind of a zooming in the European Framework for Research Careers. Next slide, please. So, as I was saying, I tried to make a kind of historical perspective about the construction of the European Research Area. As you know, it started, and I will explain, in 2000, and it was renewed in 2020 during the trio of presidencies composed by Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia, which I had the pleasure to be representing Portugal at that time. Then I will highlight you what are the major changes and the major policy mechanisms that were put in place to make it the European Research Area a reality taken up by researchers and by the other stakeholders and member states and associated countries. Because every time I'm talking about European Research Area, I'm not talking about EU27, I'm talking about EU27 and associated countries to the Horizon Europe. And as well to all the stakeholders, all the actors that are part of these countries. So European Research Area is a space. The concept originally was a space, kind of having Europe like more or less the same size as the United States. And then I will move to how we were able to inscribe in the policy agenda, again, the research careers, and to achieve the European Framework for Research Careers. And I will highlight you what are the major challenges in the implementation and what are the lessons that we have been learning from these kind of 1 year, 2 years of working. I'm working on the European Framework for Research Careers since almost since 2021 after the council conclusion, so in these almost 3 years of work. Next slide, please. I capture, finally, as I was, sorry, I was looking to all documents and I really realized that the Belgian presidency is having the real European Research Area logo, and it was nice. So I like a little bit of history, and so I think the trajectories always explain us something. And sometimes the trajectories have difficulties in getting crystallized. Sometimes they are disrupted, even by small events, and sometimes they follow, despite of all the troubles, they follow their path. These are very institutionalistic approach, but I'm a little bit like that by formation. It's important to go back a little bit to 1973, when the Commissioner for Research, because 73 is really a very important moment at the European Commission, at European communities, as it was called at that time. It was the time where the structural funds were created. It was the time where it was supposed to create the National Science Foundation of Europe. It was created the European Science Foundation. It was not what was the expectation, but that was the attempt. And it was the first time we were seeing people talking about this concept of a space. It was called in the beginning scientific area, European scientific areas, European scientific and technology area. But the attempt of the commissioner, the German commissioner of Dahrendorf, between 1970 and 74, or even Ruperti that follow him, they were not able to inscribe European Research Area in the policy making of the Union. That was done by the French Commission, the Belgian Commissioner, Philippe Poussin. During the Portuguese presidency back in 2000, when he was able, with a strong communication from the Commission towards the European Research Area, which I put here in the right part of the slide, it was this communication towards the European Research Area that was more or less the fundamental, the foundation for the European Research Area. And the Commission and member states start working on that, and I will explain a little bit more on this afterwards, namely for Research Careers. But it created a momentum, because even FP6 had new instruments to promote the European Research Area, like the Networks of Excellence, the other nets, the networks for research, for funding agencies, or for research infrastructures. That helps to create a momentum. And when was the revision of the treaties, the creation of the Treaty of Function of the European Union, the normally called Lisbon Treaty, it was institutionalized as such. There is an article 179, that states, and I put that at the bottom of the slide, what is here for the treaty. And it is it is an analogy of the internal market for goods and services. This is an internal market for knowledge. And it means that research or scientific knowledge, technology circulate freely around Europe. And of course, the aim was to become more competitive, a more knowledge-based society. Don't forget that at 2000, there was this idea that the Union will be the most competitive knowledge-based society in the world. We didn't achieve that, but that was it is. I found a slide from that time, and they say Treaty of Lisbon, taking Europe into the 21st century. And here we are. So next slide, please. I tried to show you that the priorities of the European research area didn't change much since the beginning, because most of these priorities are structural priorities of every research system. Of course, there are priorities that are linked to the coordination between the EU level and the national level. In 2000, if you go to see the communication, there was a strong emphasis on the fostering the private investment in R&I, the networks of centers of excellence. That was the idea that what was important was to concentrate and to network the centers of excellence and creating critical mass. That was the main rationale that exists at that time. It exists still today, but in a different approach. That was the time, this one, the number 4, it's a priority that disappeared because it's already in place, the networking, the electronic networks. One of the aims in 73 and what the European Science Foundation tried to do during its life was to coordinate national and European programs. It was always a failure. The only success happened with the launch of ERANET, when member states really and the Commission created this new instrument, and nowadays it's a reality that works properly, and the idea is to opening up the national programs to others and to coordinate research agendas and make joint calls. You all know about this, I hope. Then there was the questions of IPRs, companies face capital, that this type of priority have evolved, but it's all, still there with valorization of knowledge. And then there was a strong emphasis since the beginning of the creation of the European research area of human resources and mobility. And I was surprised when I was rereading this communication and seeing, of course, I knew that mobility was crucial at that time, and there was already the mentioning of the European dimension of scientific careers. So the European framework for research careers took us 23 years to be a reality. At that time, there was already an emphasis on young people and to create a kind of a taste, as they say, for research and careers in science. That I didn't remember. And of course, the attraction of third countries' researchers to the Union social and ethical values. There were work that was going within these dimensions provided done by the Commission and member states, but in 2007, there was again a period of reflection. The Commission created seven subgroups of high-level groups of experts to reflect upon European research area. And I put a copy of the so-called ERA Green Paper, and there is a collection of the synthesis of reports of all these high-level expert groups. The first one was something that we are still trying to achieve, realizing the single labor market for researchers. It's interesting because a labor market for researchers was a word that disappeared from the European agenda. It's interesting that was already in 2007 there. So the infrastructures, strengthening the research institutions, sharing of knowledge, optimizing research programs and priorities, the joint programming, and the international cooperation. There was a 7th group, which was not thematic, was rationals for European research area, which I had the honor to participate in. And there was when was created the idea of grand challenges, kind of giving directionality to the European research area. The next slide, please. this doesn't read so well, but this is Commissioner Bočnički, the Slovenian commissioner, and he continued to develop the work that was carried out before in 2007, because we were already again with the trio of President Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia. So every time European Research Area moves, is with a strong emphasis of this trio. And there was the launch of the Ljubljana process, which was to create a governance for the European Research Area. There was better careers and more mobility for researchers, but in much coming out from this. The joint program initiatives that you all should know, infrastructures, share of knowledge, and international cooperation. More or less, this is a compilation. This is a book. It's a compilation of all the council conclusions, communications that was done for synthesize in a way the European Research Area by 2008. And as I was asked to provide you with an overview of the governance of how European Research Area is governed, I want to show you in the next slide how it was until 2020. Before the European Research Area, there was CREST, and then CREST, I still remember CREST, that was created in 1973. Maybe people as old as me would remember as well CREST. It was the predecessor of ERAC, and it was a committee of high-level representatives of member states to support the DGRTD in the Council in the definition of the European policy, which there was not really a European research innovation policy, as you know, but there was a framework program, some programs that were dealing mainly linked with the Euratom Treaty. CREST evolved, please come back. CREST evolved in 2008 with all this reflection that occurred during the period that I just showed you, to a new role, to be the platform for the open method of coordination, OMC, maybe you remember, that was the rationale that more or less still is the rationale that works with the European Research Area, that it's a kind of variable geometry and to coordinate resources, not too much integrative, and was tasked to prepare and monitoring and evaluate the European Research Area initiatives. Iraq was formally created in 2010, so it was substituting CREST, and the Iraq is in what is supposed to be Iraq is the place where directors general for research and innovation from the member states join. And Iraq is an advisory board, and I will explain later as well, to the Council and to the Commission. It is shared by a member state in general and by a member of the Commission. Until 2020, during a period maybe from 2015 onwards until 2020, there was a shadow kind of an informal RPGs, which was the Director General's meeting to complement Iraq, because the Director Generals tend not to go to Iraq, and so they wanted to have a kind of a more informal place to discuss. This informal setting was discontinued after the reform of the era. The Iraq created subgroups or area-related groups or standing groups. It had several designations, and some of them you might remember. There was one on human resources and mobility, one for the SFRI, which is still alive, another one for gender. SFIC is still alive, gender is alive, SFRI is alive. Joint programming was discontinued, as well as open innovation. Next slide. So it was really member state driven and commission. So now I'm moving to what happened in 2020 with the new European Research Area. Next slide, please. And the trio put in the program of the trio that needs to be submitted and approved by the council, that it was our main focus as trio of presidents. Each presidency would focus in a part in order to complete the reform of the era. And the commission, we were, in this period, at least most of the time it happens, but sometimes it doesn't, Commission and Council were completely aligned in creating the legal instruments for this renewal of era to create. I must confess that between 2011, more or less, until 2020, European Research Area was almost dead. It was kind of doing, these working groups were working, Iraq was meeting as it's supposed to, but there was some discomfort. Member states were not happy with what was going on. Commission was not happy. So the impact of the European Research Area was minor. We have at least 2 council conclusions trying to change the governance of Iraq in order to kind of recreate a new dynamic for the European Research Area. In the country that kind of pushed forward strongly with European Research Area Conference was Germany. At least I attended 2 of these area conference. The first one in Berlin in 2016, where we discussed, for instance, I remember to participate in the panel on the innovation divide, a topic that was very important at that period. And then 2020 to prepare the council conclusions, and it was at ministerial level. What was important, and this is included in the council conclusions of 2020 by the German presidency, was to share responsibilities. It's not something that's just a member state and the commission, kind of the commission dealing with the framework program and member states trying to do national plans. It should be something of joint action and shared responsibilities. And which I think it has provided a new impetus to the European Research Area, the participation of stakeholders and citizens. And I will show you how important it was, the participation of stakeholders and citizens in the European Framework for Research Careers. The question of diversity and reinforcing the European R&I ecosystems, providing directionality, and I put in rows a target that almost no one is talking about. Everyone is talking about the 3% target, but there was a target for the countries with below average, European average. They should increase their R&I investment by 50% until 2030. But this target, I think, is almost dead. No one talks about it. And the idea was to create ERA actions and an ERA policy agenda, jointly developed by member states and the Commission, which we are now. The new slide. I try here to show you how is the policymaking process at your level. And this is a sequence of steps and policy documents in order to inscribe something in the policy agenda. So it starts always with the initiative of the Commission. The Commission published their communication on New Era 2020, and the Council always reacts to the communication of the Commission. And there was these council conclusions that I've just talked about. And these council conclusions, which are approved by unanimity by all member states, provides policy orientation to the Commission, okay? But we didn't stop there. So we had the council conclusions on research careers, 2021, the Pact for R&I, the governance of IRA and the IRA policy agenda, and in 2022, the research assessment and implementation of open science. So all of these, sorry, something went wrong here. Sorry, I lost my. Oh, yes, I'm back. And so just to give you an idea, the council conclusions on research careers gave the opportunity for the council and the commission to propose a council recommendation for the European framework for research careers. The ERA governance creates the ERA forum, which is an important forum that we all know because it is the first time that stakeholders sit at the table of the policy-making process, which means that in the beginning, before that, when the Commission is preparing a communication, in general, have informal contacts, have lobbies trying to impact on the Commission direction. With the other forum, where you sit member states, associated countries, and stakeholders, and now I'm talking to you, stakeholders, researchers, have a say through their umbrella organizations. And that means that you are, when the things are in the making, if you are a structured organization, you can pass your message through their forum and try to change what is in the preparation, because this is all about ideas that needs to pass through. And the other forum has this really important place. So we have, in terms of the other policy agenda, I just will focus on action 4 mainly, and which is the one that is responsible for research careers. And we have, I put the council conclusions on research assessment because that's these council conclusions that create COARA, that all of you knows, this coalition of will in order to coordinate all the main actors in the system to reform the research assessment. Next slide. For you to have an idea, I just kind of have stolen this slide to Dario Capezuto, which is my colleague in Action 4 and the policy officer of the Commission, which shows the priority areas of the Pact and the other policy agenda. And you can see they are divided in 4 areas: deepening the IRA, the internal market, broadening the IRA, widening, and prioritizing investment. But if you look in detail, some of the priorities are the same. Some of the more on the deepening of the IRA, you can find them back in 2000 because they have to be there and they will be there in 2030 for sure. So this gives you an idea how is the discussion that is going on for the next ERA policy agenda, which means that there are actions that cannot be discontinued after 3 years because they have to be there because they are structure of the systems. Next slide. So I told you before about the ERA governance that we had the ERAC and these ERA-related groups. What is different and how it was created, it's based on the pact that defines the fundamental values, principles, and priorities, what are the main actions and policy coordination mechanisms. And what is different now is that there is not this stable groups that used to be like human resources, IrishRSA, but there are actions that vary according to the period of time. They can come in and go. Another action needs to be relevant, at least following one packed priority, needs to be viable, and of having objectives to be achieved during the 3 years of existence, and at least half of the member states need to be involved. So this is the discussion we are right now for the agenda 2025-2027. In principle, there will be some changes in these area policy actions of the previous area policy agenda that I showed you before. Next slide. And it became more complex, the governance, okay? And because there was a need for the council in the council conclusions to make clear who was in charge of what, okay? So council is the decision-making body, as you know, and provides policy guidance. The European Commission is an executive body, okay? It has the right of initiative. Council cannot, only in certain cases can move alone. In general, it reacts to the initiative of the Commission. That was in the founding treaties since ever. So Council needs to approve the pact, Council recommendations for the pact, needs to approve the midterm priorities for our policy agenda. It means that the area policy agenda for 2025-2027 that is now under discussion in area forum, and now moving to ERAC, and then moves to the Commission proposal, and then goes to the Council. And is responsible to approve the midterm assessment. The Council can organize area ministerial conferences. There was one in Germany during German presidency, one in Slovenian presidency. But I think the next presidency will do a ministerial conference. ERAC, as a joint committee from the Council and from the European Commission, is the high-level policy body to provide advice to these bodies. And it's up to the ERAC to initiate the area policy agenda process, okay? So area forum, on the other hand, is an expert level commission group. Area forum belongs to the commission. Although it is composed by member states, as I said, associated countries and stakeholders, the input of the area forum goes directly to the commission. It doesn't go to the council. Okay, member states participate, but it's not part of the council, it's part of the commission. Next slide. And as you can see in the title, this idea of the stakeholders at the table. I just want now to focus a little bit on research careers and to go a little bit faster. I will say that, as I said, it was already in 2000. There were some actions with two mechanisms that they were reformed but still exist. The Charter and Code and IrishRSA human resource strategies that were created between 2005 and 2008. And then nothing happened. Nothing happened regarding research careers. It was only with our council conclusion 2021 and the council recommendation in 2023 that we were able to put research careers again at the policy agenda, and we are moving forward. Of course, the situation also asks the council and the commission to move forward. Next slide. More or less until 2021, the focus was on mobility and we have created a lot of mobile researchers, and that created unforeseen problems for a member state because there was no more vertical research careers, but horizontal. And the greatest impact, in my opinion, was in recruitment that was to be open, merit-based, transparent, and international comparable. At the time, there was already the idea of an assessment be qualitative and quantitative, so there is no news. Next slide. Next slide. So, again, I want to show you how we did, and I think this is a recipe for success, in my opinion. How did we initiate this process that was blocked in 2011 and was successfully launched in 2021? We start by, there was a coordinated action of the trio, but namely by the Portuguese presidency, which had the research careers at this political priority. And we were tasked to do council conclusions on this subject. And I think the most important step that we have done was to create council conclusions that were really framing the path towards the future. And that was achieved through a lot of consultation. To write the council conclusions, we had meetings with all the delegates, all member states, councillors. We had a dedicated workshop with ERAC, with researchers on human resources and practitioners and member states representatives. We have discussed with all the associations. ICoRSA, I think we didn't know ICoRSA at that time, maybe it didn't exist already, but I don't remember having meeting ICoRSA, but we met with all the other university associations and stakeholders. And what I think was important was that we have included most of the suggestions that were brought to us. And what was important for us was we realized that what existed until now didn't work. All the attempts by Council, European Parliament, Commission didn't work. So we need to change the approach. And the approach was, on one side, to focus on the researcher, and the other side to focus in an holistic approach, mobilizing all the public policies that deal with the researchers' careers, because it until then was just a question of research policies, and that was not the case. You have employment policies, we have social security, we have all the other policies that need to be aligned. And I think the other factor for success is, again, to discuss the documents before it reached the table of the council with stakeholders. And that was done through the other forum, through workshops that were organized in the member states. And this process was, in a way, coordinated by the Action for, which, although it's a structural action, as we called, doesn't have a standing group. It is just governed by the Commission, Portugal, and the Coimbra Group. So it's this trio that have been doing the work for moving forward the European framework. Then, next slide, and I will not. So this is a flow chart of kind of the European framework for research careers, important definition of research, the interoperability and comparability of careers, recruitment and working conditions, and precarity, which is linked as well with balanced circulation of talents, career assessment, development and progression, skills, and then there is the support actions that I'm not going to focus. Next slide. More or less, just to give you an overview, we have already the research career in the European databases on the qualifications. This is really a great advancement that we have achieved. It is work by the Commission. Still, there are some work to be done at the international level, but research career exists already in the qualifications. Next slide. There is a for the European framework to be implemented, which is just a recommendation. We need to have everyone to think about different paths, how careers can be recognized and rewarded regardless of the sector, how we can consider non-linear and hybrid careers to be recognized. Next slide. Previous one. That was working conditions and the precarity. The council included two other careers that were not part of the original proposal of the Commission: research management and support staff for research. That these two needs to be developed. Nevertheless, the council recommendation as well doesn't have developed a European tenure like model, which is still need to be defined. And there are still strong discussions about how we can reduce precarity. Next slide. Career assessment, I'm not going to talk because I think the important message that I want to pass here is don't let the assessment of research careers being diluted in the ICoRSA broader point of view. We cannot disconnect the research assessment from the research careers. That's a battle that I've been pushing very hard, and I think we really need to guarantee that the research assessment for researchers are part of the research careers. Next slide. And this is what is my reflection over this period. And first, as I said, council recommendation is not mandatory. It's policy orientation, and it's strong, and we see many member states moving forward. And we have recently had a workshop in Porto, and we have examples of Belgium, examples of the Netherlands, Spain. Countries are moving towards the European framework, research careers framework principle. So it's in action and is moving. It's important, I think, not to forget the overarching approach and to have involved other public policies, the coordination at multiple levels, because research careers owners are at all levels, most of the time at actor level. So it's really important to keep this in mind. But above all, and that's what my most important message for you today, we need to allow time for cultural change, and we need to be organized in a structured way to contribute to the policymaking process for the European framework to be a success. So it's up to you, researchers, organizations of researchers, to move forward within your organization, within your associations, so that this culture change can happen, this change in the legislation, if needs to be done. And I think with this, I'm finishing my presentation. Just an overview of the Action 4. We have done almost everything that we were supposed to do in 2022-2023. Our challenge now is to gather evidence from all member states to understand how the framework is being implemented at all member states, actors level, universities, RPOs, etc. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Louisa, for that very comprehensive presentation. Very lots and lots of knowledge passed across. So I'm going to just say to the audience that we do have time for one or two questions before we move on to our guided discussion. So please feel free to put into the chat. So I will just have a look here. Okay, so Gordon Dalton from Plucon and Gran Canaria, and also ICoRSA. Why why does European Commission and European Research Area only concentrate on early career researchers? Medium and senior career researchers appear to be ignored. Can you kind of comment on that?
Yes, I do. We realize, and that's not a question just of the European Commission, you can find it as well as policy orientation from the Council in many documents, is that in general, senior researchers have a more stabilized research career, and we found where the most problematic issues were happening were at postdoctoral level or graduating students with no social security, for instance. Postgraduate, then you have the value of that for postgrads. So we thought that although there are problems, I agree, at senior level, and it needs to be not to be forgotten, for sure.
Yeah.
But the major problems nowadays are in the youngsters and the low attractiveness of research careers nowadays for the young people. We see even top-level labs not being able to recruit as they used to. So this is really an important problem. That's why we focus on the most difficult problem to be solved. Yeah.
Okay, of course, it totally makes sense. So just another one we often, and Gordon has it here as well, but it's something that it often talks about recommendations, as related to the research career framework. How legal is this framework? So that's kind of what people will ask. What does these recommendations mean?
Yeah, there are one major distinction in legal acts is the legal acts and non-legal acts or non-binding instruments, if you can say so. For instance, a council conclusion, it's not a legal act. It's not binding. Council recommendation is not binding, but it doesn't mean that they don't have they are not powerful as well, because it's in this type of documents, non-legal documents, where the orientations, the recommendations, the way forward is expressed. Because for instance, when you do a framework program, you do a legal act, because then it's a lot of regulation. But when you are trying to define more orientation in terms of policy measures, it's non-binding instruments that is used. And there is as well something very important. Why did we choose a policy recommendation, a council recommendation, which is stronger in the hierarchy, stronger than a commission recommendation? There are an hierarchy. It is no one, the research and innovation policy is a shared policy in the treaty. So it means that the Commission can have the initiative in the policies by its own, and member states as well. But even member states don't have completely capacity in many member states to tackle research careers. Sometimes it's if they are federal, it's at state level or at regional level. And as well, there are researchers at private companies. So there is no legal recommendations that can be imposed to the private companies. So this format for us, the council recommendation, is a strong policy document and recommendation, and avoids legal problems. So that's why I was saying that's important, because it promotes cultural change. It promotes change in the legal act at the appropriate levels. Because this is a multi-level decision process, because universities have autonomies and companies have autonomy, RPOs have autonomy sometimes, regions, it's multi-level. It must be impossible to do a legal act.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a million. So I think so we'll get into a discussion which kind of even follows on from this. So I like the way you mentioned about culture change, because culture change does take a long time. But I liked from this presentation and also our previous discussions that we had together is that it's key to pass our message along in a very structured manner, particularly researchers on what kind of affects us. But often we find like nationally as well, and I'm not just speaking for Ireland, but in different places, but policy documents and career frameworks are often approved without the input of researchers. And what advantage do you see in consulting researchers during this process of drafting these documents? And what can kind of government departments, research performing organizations do to really organically let this consultation happen? So what would you recommend?
I explain you the approach I have taken as chair of the Research Working Party, which was we took the lead to consult and to do it while we were drafting in an informal way. We were not sharing our document. We were sharing our ideas. I think you can do it in other settings if you create a proper organization, and if you provide your organization with ideas, and you have in general, I think to have a kind of a position paper helps, so it can help your action or your career owner to understand that you have reflected upon the European Framework for Research Careers, and we have compared what needs to be done and what could be feasible. If you are a reliable and thought-provoking partner, I think you are being taken serious. But it has to be. It has a lot of trust building, if I can say so.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And yeah, so it takes a lot of work. It's not like going to the streets and we want this. No, it's more complex. Takes a lot of work, lots of reflection. But if you are producing papers and if you are producing reflection, the other side certainly will react on the same way. You create a communication channel through it, and then it institutionalizes, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're trying to do through the Irish Research Staff Association, particularly in Ireland. And also that's obviously what Bruno in Aniket has been doing, and through the Portuguese. And I know there's been interactions between yourself. So I'd like to actually pass it over to Bruno, because I think Bruno has a question that he'd like to pose to you.
Yes, I would. So thank you for this really nice overview of the European research area and the research career framework. So I think you touched base on this in the very last part of your presentation. But regarding the research career framework, and I think Dario Capasuto also mentioned this in a recent workshop, he mentioned that there is a responsibility also for the RPOs to act not only on a national level, but also at the local level, to try to push this forward and to implement this framework in these different organizational levels. So how do you envision researcher engagement and involvement in this process at these different levels, both locally and also nationally?
Of course, the framework applies to every organization that has researchers employed, public or private, non-profit, it applies. In my opinion, and what we have been doing in Portugal and some of you know, we have done already 4 workshops promoted by the FCT and Action 4 in order to create awareness, not to the owners, to the bosses of the RPOs, to the bosses of universities, to the unions, to all the stakeholders that are relevant in the research careers, to create awareness that there is a new way of thinking. And we have done that here in Portugal, at least 2 of that. We have just done the last one in Porto in 17th of April, where we tried to show, that was European, this workshop, to show what are the measures, the support measures that exist at European level to help the organizations to apply the European framework. And there is right now calls within the Horizon Europe wide area to support this. So this is really as well something that is important to convey to your university, that there are mechanisms. For instance, one of our idea was to promote in Portugal IrishRSA, because none of our universities have this kind of strategy. So we want to promote that. So I think this kind of nudging process, it's really very important. It's going to start a mutual learning exercise for research careers by the Commission. And for instance, in our case, our approach as Portugal is to not only involve our delegate, but invite some stakeholders or some umbrella people that can organize their RPOs communities, their universities, and participate in one of that meeting and then convey and reflect. So this mutual learning exercise, that the meeting will be 28th, 29th of June, is as well a good opportunity for you to interact with your funding agents or with your ministries to understand, because the Commission is promoting this networking through the member states, so that not only someone like me is participating, but stakeholders are involved to create networks of stakeholders, so the share of experience that is going to happen in the mutual learning exercise can be as well directly benefit the different type of institutions or different type of stakeholders can benefit from it, either directly or indirectly. So that's an opportunity as well that I think you should take into account. And I will talk to you about this, Bruno.
Yeah, I think that's a key message, and very important for opening up these interactions with the different associations. I think that mutual learning experience is really the way to move forward. Yeah.
We have a question from the audience, Luisa, from Ilza. Is there any chance to start implementing more permanent research career funding schemes? At the moment, the main way to have a permanent job in fundamental research is via academia, faculty positions, which is not a priority for many postdocs. I replied to Ilza about the Portuguese case of the tenure track model and also the German, but perhaps Luisa could also provide inputs on this.
I can just add something. By treaty, if you are talking about European Union funding for positions, by the treaty, it's impossible. The Commission cannot fund permanent positions or cannot fund positions. What is possible for the European framework programs is to fund projects. So we can fund projects to test, but not positions. So can fund a position to do a project, you know? But so at European level, it's impossible, at least with this treaty, okay? And I think with any treaty, because the union cannot substitute member states organizations in providing positions. Of course, in my opinion, and the more I read about this, and we have seen a change during maybe from the 80s onwards, when the project funding became the most relevant mode of funding to research, that there was a trend to reduce the core budget of universities for positions, and the trend for the funding agencies to support staff or with fellowships or contracts for performing projects, or like ERC to perform their own project. So, and this is now, it's quite imbalanced. So, and there is fewer positions and fewer teams and more type of organization of research based on a principal investigator and one or two postdocs and one or two PhDs. And the traditional research teams that was kind of normal in the past in research collectives almost not disappeared, but has been reduced, and the core funding for the universities, for the other organization, reduced as the competitive funding was, and project-based competitive funding was increasing. So I think in order to solve this situation, we need as well to push for a change in the way research is funding at national and European level.
Yeah, and I think that is key, and that kind of links in with sorry, so there's a question in the audience from L. I'm not entirely sure what your name is, but what are some of the tips that you can help us in terms of ideation of the problem and determining whether it be fruitful or not, or how we know the problem we're tackling can be solved? So I think I can actually even answer that question. So that's why we're kind of running these workshops, is to kind of promote how researchers can structurally engage. So I would look at your national associations and then link in with the International Consortium of Research Staff Associations like ourselves and the different associations. So ourselves and Anikit in Portugal, and also in Nintech, we've been linking in, and there's been a real cross-pollination of ideas. But what I think is it's all to do with powers and numbers, and I think that is the way that we can kind of have some cultural change. The change may not happen tomorrow, but it may take a bit of a longer time. But I think the more people that are educated on these different processes, although sometimes I know they can be very, very complicated, the more that we can do moving forward. But I think
yeah, Mike, can I just complement what you were saying about the time that it takes, because that's actually a very valid point. We, as an association, have been advocating for the need for a more structured career in research, for the need to implement permanent positions since 2013-14, basically since the time where we started as a formal association. And many of these processes and many of these, as we call, cultural changes, they take time. And you need to keep pushing and discussing the issue. And perhaps people need to be aware that some of the changes that occur might not affect them directly. So they might be pushing forward for something that will benefit future researchers and probably, or at least not directly themselves. But still, this is a fight worth fighting for, because we need to start creating and implementing a career as a professional career, just like any other in our society. So, but people really need to take that into consideration. It might obviously affect them, but in the long term, it will be highly beneficial for future researchers that might yet still be in their training at this moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, there's so many different issues and challenges amongst even different countries that's why it's important for us to link in, particularly if we
Yeah,
have this framework, okay? But then like, there's a different way of doing things in Portugal, different way in Ireland, Spain, et cetera, et cetera. But it is important for us to link in to kind of see what these challenges are. And then so we're at least aware and then in some way try to find some sort of solutions.
yeah.
Uh, well, so I think so Carolina, I know, has a question there that she'd like to ask, and just in the interest of time, I think we'll after this question.
Okay. I think we almost replied to this question, but since the career, and Luis, you mentioned a lot this question between the legal and the non-binding question, since the research careers is not EU competence, which additional initiatives do you think the Commission could use and the member states could use to effectively implement the European Researchers Career Framework?
I wouldn't say that research careers is not a EU competence compared to the EU doesn't have competence in higher education careers, but it can have, as I said, because education policies are member state level policies, are national policies. Research careers, as we could have had this initiative because it's a shared policy. So the Commission can act upon the European layer and provide direction to member states, okay? We have already, if you go to the site of the IDERA, you see a pilot for institutional funding to help institutions to adopt the European framework. And you have as well all the other support measures like EuroAxis, like IrishRSA, etc. So there are, and of course, if you have any other idea that you can think about an instrument, or you can think about a problem that could be solved at European level, please pass the message to us, to Action 4, and we will do our best to discuss and see if it can be real something that we can tackle at European level. Because, of course, nowadays we are more on this kind of communities of practice, mutual learning exercise, sharing experience, learning from one another, and as well funding from Horizon Europe. But we are preparing FP10, okay, to the next framework program. So it is the time to think of something, if you have ideas about how can the next framework program help there, please, it's the time to convey this message to your member state delegates, to us, to everywhere, because it's time now for your associations to think about it. How do you, ICoRSA, ANIT, etc., how do you see research careers in the next framework program? Is that a problem that the next framework program can take care of?
Well, first of all, I think the example that you gave about the pilot test is quite important. And that pilot test is a call for projects to implement the research career frameworks that is now, it will open, actually it's not still open, and it will close in September this year. So every researcher that is interested, please contact their universities. But I believe that this program, the wider program, should maintain in the next framework program. So this is a message that we should convey, and that I take this opportunity. Also, regarding the sustainable funding, I see your view, and I agree with that we need to demand the member states for them to implement this type of cultural change and institutional change among their institutions. Perhaps the University Alliance could be a good example of piloting these type of funding schemes.
Yeah.
With different funding resources, but it's not sustainable in the long run. So the problem will maintain.
Yeah, when we did the council conclusions, we proposed the University Alliance to pilot the framework for research careers, but so far I haven't heard that. I think they are doing something, but not as a real pilot, because all the other universities were complaining that not only the University Alliance should be done, and I don't know what is the status now, but this is what you just said, really important. In general, when we prepare the next framework program, some new instruments are piloting in the last few years of the current framework program. It needs to be successful. It needs to have the strength to pass through, okay? And to enter into the regulation. So it needs, I'm not saying lobbying, but it needs a lot of reflection and support, and in a way that it's considered important, kind of position papers or other things that goes to higher levels and be exposed to the people that are preparing the new framework program. I know that there are a lot. So this is the time for lobbying, if I can use this word. Huh?
Perfect. Yeah, so we have some homework to do.
Yeah, I think so.
Perfect. So I'm just conscious that we're 15 minutes over time. So I'd like to thank all the participants today, and obviously I really want to thank you, Louisa, for your time. We really, really appreciate it. Knowledge is exceptional, and we love to continue working with you. And I'd also like to thank Bruno as well, and also, of course, Carolina, who's really the driving force and the one who did conceptualize this, and she's the one who works all in the background. So if anyone would like to know more about ICoRSA or the Irish Research Staff Association or any of the research staff associations, please feel free to contact me or ICoRSA at any time. And we'd be like I said, we're more than happy to help, and we hope that we can organize further events like this in the future. And we will be sending the recording of this event to everyone, and also the summary of the kind of findings and what was discussed. So with that, I think I will say goodbye, and I hope you all have a lovely evening, and we will talk to you soon and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
It was a
you.
pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.